Well, welcome everybody. I wanted to make sure that everybody can hear me. If you're not able to hear me, let us know through the chat box. But I want to welcome and thank you all for joining us for AMIA's second webinar in the best practices for personal audiovisual collections. The webinars were developed and are being produced by the AMIA Online Continuing Education Task Force. So first, maybe a show of hands. Can you use the hand feature, the raised hand feature in your box if you can hear me? It looks like most people can hear me. Before we dive in, my name is Laura Rooney, and I'll serve today as the producer for today's webinar. And before we dive in, I just want to be sure that we can hear from you. So there is a chat box, which you've all seen, and we'll be taking questions today via the chat box. So feel free to send questions along to the entire group, or you can send them directly to me, because sometimes it is difficult for the presenter to use the chat box and present and keep track of the questions. So what she's not able to catch, I will try, and we'll go from there. We've muted the audio on all the participants, so chatting will be the way that you let us know that you have a question. And we do have a smaller group today, so it may be possible at the end to open it up for an audio Q&A, and we'll see how we are on time with that. So it's 11:01, so we'll start to, I guess it's time to get started. I want to introduce today's presenter, Lauren Sorenson. And then, Lauren, maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about yourself before we dive into the topic.
Sure. Yeah, thanks very much. I am an audiovisual archivist. My main focus is digital and video. I now work as the digital asset manager and archivist at the Hammer Museum. Previous to that, I worked at the Library of Congress, and before that at Bay Area Video Coalition, where I worked with artists and individuals hands-on with their collections. And I just want to thank, first of all, the folks out of the AMIA office, first and foremost, for putting this together and this really great initiative that AMIA has decided to take the initiative on, and I think it's a really great thing for our community. And second of all, the content developers who worked really hard in the last few months to get the curriculum going and to work together really closely. So that's Eddie Colleton, who is a graduate student at the NYU Moving Image Archiving and Preservation Program, Marie Laskew from Crowing Rooster Arts, Yvonne Ng from Witness, and I was also involved in the content development for this webinar. So we're really happy that you all are here. Like Laura said, please feel free to put your messages into the chat box if you have any questions during the webinar. I will try and take a pause if I can, but like Laura said, we'll kind of see how we are with time at the end. So this is the second in a series, and what we'll cover today, I wanted to kind of review that. First, I want to start with kind of our assumptions going into this webinar. We are here assuming that you want to maintain a part of either your family history, personal projects, art created on or with moving image media over the long term, like say for a lifetime, or have the goal of passing these artifacts on to your children, family, or community. The goal here is not necessarily for historical or research purposes like an archive might intend. However, the talk will center around applying and framing archive practices to meet the needs of personal collections. Because of the variances and context-specific nature of the work of archiving and preservation, it depends for our community. We kept this talk to cover kind of broad topics, discussing vendor relationships, a case study with MiniDV, and a general discussion of digital access and preservation. And like I said, please feel free to use the chat window for any questions. There might not be time for all questions, but I will make a shared document with all of your questions that I can share after, and I will let you know if I need to say research a question, things like that. So first up is in introducing this webinar is choosing a vendor versus at-home digitization. This topic extends out from our last webinar in this series, which went over topics such as identifying formats, managing your collection, and choosing items you would like to digitize, and potential reasons for doing so. In this section, we will go over speaking with vendors and some items that might pertain to archival practice that you might want to push for when communicating with these folks about your home collection. Next up is a case example, MiniDV digitization at home. We'll be covering the steps to setting up a very basic transfer station for the MiniDV format. And next is access and preservation. So in this section, we will cover what happens to your files after you've created them from copying off of the tape. How to go about, say, giving a remote family member access to your files and saving over the long term, what kind of steps you need to take and what you need to think about. And also, I wanted to kind of, in this first kind of introductory slide, I wanted to go over some terminology. Because it can get a little bit hairy, you know, media, transfer, preservation, access, these are all kinds of terms that are in our day-to-day usage, but I kind of wanted to give you kind of a rough definition of what they will be covering or what they kind of define in the context of this webinar. So media, I'm going to use this term throughout the talk to refer in a generalized way to any moving image assets such as film, video, that you might be interested in keeping or preserving or providing access to. Access this term refers to providing a means to view and use your media via description or technical means. Preservation is long-term use. So anytime I refer to preservation, I'm really talking about kind of the long-term possibilities for your video or film. You know, preservation in the archival world means, you know, kind of preservation for historical purposes, but in this context, we want preservation to mean for you, for your personal family history, for, you know, the community history, that kind of thing. So we wanted to really focus on that specific use case. Digital refers to digital media stored on a format readable by computer software or hardware. Analog refers to anything that's not digital in nature. So say a VHS tape, which is analog video. You might be familiar with that with the VCR, and that transition from analog to digital media that we've all been going through in the past 15 or so years. Or, you know, a 16mm film format is another example of an analog format. Transfer refers to the act of copying an original tape to a digital file format, tape or film to a digital file format. So that anything in that interaction. And digitization is really the same thing. So anytime I use transfer or digitization, those will be basically interchangeable within the context of this talk. So digitization, the first section up in this follow-up from our last personal collections webinar series is digitization. What is digitization? We are going to define digitization here as creating a file from a source tape or analog media, such as film, or playing back on a computer. Files are made up of a container, most often associated with the file extension, and often two codec streams. So that's audio and video. If your source is made up of moving image and sound components, like a Super 8mm film with a magnetic track or a VHS tape recorded with sound, that would include an audio and a video codec within a container. Codecs allow your computer to read back a file and do other things to it depending on the software you're using. So for example, QuickTime 7, a software type that is commonly used on Mac computers, will allow playback and some rudimentary editing features, and it supports the MOV codec. It supports the MOV wrapper, and it supports a number of codecs within that wrapper. So why digitize? You may have heard some reasons in the last webinar in the series, but to review, you may have assessed the value based on certain parameters that matter to you. Archivists call this appraisal. You may have determined that the media itself will decay soon, or you would like to provide access to your family's home movies in a digital form, streaming online to share with family members who might be far away. And for more information about this topic, I'm not going to go really deeply into codecs and containers for this type of audience, but if you would like to have more information about this topic, you can refer to the excellent digital topics series called Introduction to Digital Formats and Storage, which is another AMIA webinar series that happened and is happening right as we speak. So first we are going to go over using a vendor versus at-home digitization. So we want to kind of review here some basic questions about your collections to help you gauge your individual situation that we hope will help you decide where you want to allocate your resources. And most of these questions will give you a choice between the resource of time and the resource of money. So one factor is to the question of digitizing at potentially a lower quality at home with inexpensive equipment, or wait to digitize at a higher quality with a vendor. This question, like many of these, is very specific to your individual situation. Care in an archive might be different than following archival principles as best you can in your specific context. For example, a film or video lab might, one, work faster. They already have their digitization component part set up. They have their playback deck. They have their quality control check, all of that already set up and have that experience. So might go a little bit faster. They already have that kind of infrastructure set up. Two, they might have a variety of formats that they are able to digitize, so you would be able to possibly give them your Hi8 videotape and VHS tape without having to purchase, say, 2 playback decks on your own. Another advantage is that they might be able to monitor the signal coming off of the tape and make necessary adjustments to correspond with, say, a broadcast standard or careful adjustments for more specialized work such as artist video can be easily done at a lab. Care and handling of the tape could be a factor for you. Video lab staff will know what specifically to look for in regards to mold, sticky shed syndrome, and other degradation that could affect how the tape plays back. However, a central factor I would like to highlight in this specific question is time. There's not much time left for particularly magnetic media, video and audio, that are older. Any videotape sitting on a shelf is itself at risk of degradation due to just that fact. It's sitting on the shelf versus being digitized. So a very important question is which option will give you the opportunity to more quickly get the media off of the original tape and onto a digital file, especially in this case for this particular form of moving image media, magnetic media, which is a large portion, especially coming up now with home collections that were created in the 80s and Hi8, VHS, things like that. Very much at risk. As professional archivists, we understand that pushing for at-home digitization is not universally accepted in our field. However, we feel that we should be able to give advice about these matters in the context of this personal collections webinar with the understanding that it is something that may not be accepted in an archive setting. And I also just wanted to interject and apologize. I'm getting over a cold, so I'm sorry if I sound froggy at all. All right, so the next question to consider, how much time or money can you commit to the effort? Do-it-yourself digitization takes quite a bit of time and effort, depending on the format. Time to set up your station, do the actual digitization, troubleshooting. You could also consider a mix of options instead of just vendor versus do-it-yourself. If you have a wide variety of format types, you may want to consider setting up a station for one format only and send the rest to a vendor. All right, next question. What kind of equipment do you already have? Maybe you have the same camera that you use to shoot the footage you have in your collection. You can often use this same equipment to capture to a digital file. Analog formats such as VHS or U-matic or others are a bit more complicated, especially if you'd like to monitor the signal through a measurement device. There's a bit more training involved, but the format we'll be looking at today, MiniDV, is relatively simple to copy, minus any troubleshooting efforts you may encounter. And you might also have the cables and computer needed for the capture sequence. or workflow. How well do you know the equipment and how to operate it? So in approaching your media collection, you also want to take stock in identifying the condition of your equipment. We recommend doing a trial run with sample tapes, meaning tapes that might be in your possession that you've determined don't have value to you, so you can see kind of how it works, if it runs, that kind of thing. Another question to consider is are there reputable local vendors, or would you like to ship your media, or will you have to ship your media rather? Another factor in any media that is valuable to you is your personal connection to it. Do you feel comfortable sending a package in the mail to a vendor via some shipping service with some risk of loss? There are some features provided by shipping service companies that can mitigate these kinds of feelings of risk, such as tracking and insurance, but ultimately it comes down to you and your personal collection and your context, what your comfort level is. I always think that that's an important thing to consider. All right, so we're going to move on to how to evaluate vendors. So for this section, we're going to assume here that you ended up choosing a vendor for your digitization needs. You didn't feel comfortable firing up that old MiniDV deck, or do you have a wide variety of formats that you'd like a vendor to tackle? These are some practical questions that you might want to consider. Will the vendor return your original? There are some vendors out there who will, as practice, just as normal practice, throw away your original. You really want to make sure that that does not happen. And when you start working out with a vendor, you will want to take into consideration some factors that might pertain to archival practice or might apply here in your situation. Kind of list out what you need from the vendor before talking to them. You might want to consider the idea of returning your original, like I said. I know many folks want to purge and digitize their collection in order to save physical space, but this practice isn't something that we would recommend. Since you won't have a dedicated archivist for your collection's care, you want to be able to have as many copies as possible. We'll go into this a bit more a little bit later, following digitization. So does the vendor have a policy around damage to the original tape in transfer? So at times, because the original tape is older and possibly in questionable condition, the vendor might discover a problem or damage your tape. It's important to discuss if they offer to repair or find another way, such as rehousing something like a videotape housing or a film splice in order to make a successful transfer, and what that might cost you. What is your time frame? Is there any particular event you're shooting for and date by which you hope to have the transfer completed? Some labs might have special timelines for small projects that they should be able to communicate to you. What file formats can the vendor deliver? Is the file format best for your needs and storage capacity? File formats is a tricky topic because it's such a new part of our field. Digital preservation of video and film, and folks are still getting a handle on standards in our field, especially for video. There are file formats you will want for archiving, not necessarily for playing back, but for safekeeping. And some options work better than others depending on your needs and uses. If you want a file format that is stable and well supported, commonly used by archives, I will shout out some examples here, some high-level specifications. So I'm not going into a whole lot of detail here, but I thought it would be useful to at least tell you what kind of the field is looking at. And if you have any questions, again, we can kind of go over this at the end. It is probably the most complicated part of the talk, and I don't want to scare you off. We want our eye on the ball to be digitization, getting your focus on getting the actual content off of your magnetic media, that unstable carrier. But anyway, so for analog video, QuickTime MOV files with a 10-bit uncompressed video codec and a PCM audio codec are commonly recommended. These files take up quite a bit of space, so depending on your comfort level or needs, you may want to ask your vendor to provide you with losslessly compressed files, such as FFV1 in an MKV wrapper or JPEG 2000. For video that is already in a digital carrier, such as MiniDV, you will want to consider asking the vendor to keep the characteristics of the file the same and transferring off of that unstable tape carrier, essentially copying the tape to a file. So a MiniDV tape is essentially just digital in itself. It's just bits that have been written onto a thin, fragile tape format. So you basically just want the vendor to be able to copy that off straight off. You want DV is a pretty stable format. It's very common and actually fairly well supported. At least there's kind of a thinking in our field that DV will have to be migrated, and there's a need for that, and it's a very common format. So so we recommend that for DV. There are other digital formats that are a bit more complicated, but they're not as common in home collections, so we won't be reviewing that. For film, you might want to consider a DPX file format with 2K, 2048 pixels width for a digital video codec, and a broadcast wave file for the audio codec. This is, again, a complicated topic and depends on your needs, but this is just to throw out some examples of some good practices that some archives have adopted. And please don't let these technical specifications overwhelm. The important thing is that you're taking action to digitize your collections. And though these are important questions, that is not maybe the purpose. So you want to really think about the act of digitizing and what your priorities are. If you're interested in learning more deeply about choices for digital archiving and are a more advanced user, like I said, you can check out the Introduction to Digital File Formats and Storage webinars. For editing purposes, you may want to ask your vendor for a recommendation based on what software you intend to use for editing. And you may want to consider also having an access file format, so a file format that is appropriate for streaming or uploading to sites such as Vimeo or YouTube, should you go that route. These services often have preferred formats on their help sites, or you may ask your vendor for a current recommendation. The next question is, on what storage media do you want the files delivered? Again, this is a highly subjective question. Your vendor may have a preferred option. Your media, along with kind of like a preferred format. So, you might want to buy a hard drive and have your vendor put your media on that hard drive along with the description and things. So, this is a kind of a back and forth kind of discussion type thing. So it's mainly, what your needs are, where are you going to store it going forward, that kind of thing. So we'll get more into that a bit later. All right. Looks like I skipped ahead on the slide. Apologies for that. So we want to talk about how to evaluate vendors. Okay, sorry. All right, so we want to be talking about now how to evaluate vendors. So quality assurance and quality control. This is a popular topic with archivists. So we're going to discuss some suggested questions that you might ask a vendor about their process. Do they inspect the media before they inspect the media that they receive? Can they give you any notes on the physical inspection? Do they monitor any signal coming off of the tape? Or do they have anyone supervising the transfer? Do they think that the files will be able to be played back on a computer specs you shared with them? Or can they recommend a computing consultant to help you figure that out? A central question for this page section is if the vendor is clear with you about the steps taken in the digitizing process. Does the vendor assess the original? Can they describe to you the steps in handling an inspection for your valuable original? Sometimes it is telling in selecting a vendor if they are able to talk with you in detail about what steps they take and what they offer to note down in description. So this is kind of maybe more of a relationship question, right? So, how do you trust this vendor? Can you easily communicate with them? Spot check delivered files yourself at the beginning, middle, and end. We recommend conducting a spot check on any files that you receive back from the vendor by I will just go ahead and copy the URL at the end of the talk so that you all have that if you're interested. All right. So next is what to prepare before sending a media to a vendor. So you are going to want to talk to your vendor, to shop around, reach out to communities like AMIA, create an inventory of media items before shipping, request the highest quality file possible in a sustainable file format. Remember that video files can be large. Be prepared to store original files, backups, and smaller access copies. And description is a very important part of long-term use. You will want them to take notes on some items about your tapes, including tape label, numbering system, software used, or recording device if they have that available to them. And you might want to provide later for your own records any kind of description that you find about your media, some subjects, people in your recording, location of your recording, that kind of thing. It's all very, very part and parcel of sustaining your collection. And we'll go into that more deeply later when we talk about digital preservation in a personal archive collection context. So at-home digitization. This is where we really dig into the process. So as archivists, we understand that people want to know how to digitize their own media at home. We also acknowledge that everyone's audiovisual content will not make its way into a collecting institution. Archival level digitization and subsequent preservation is not at all guaranteed at home, but there are steps that you can take and major advantages to transfer. The first is getting the content off of that fragile MiniDV tape in the context of this case study and onto a digital format where you can make multiple copies, easily copy, and even share with others in your family who are elsewhere in the world. So it's a really wholly new horizon, really, really fantastic. The downside to at-home digitization is that there are advantages to the process that aren't available to the consumer or for someone who has a personal collection, who owns that personal collection and wants to transfer it. So it's something like identifying signs of degradation. We also talked earlier about inspection of video. So that's kind of one thing that you kind of have to learn hands-on from someone who is maybe in the field or has a background in video engineering, that kind of thing. So with these points in mind, there are certain video and audio formats that are likely numerous in an average household to the point where it may be financially unfeasible to send them all to a qualified vendor. This section of the webinar will focus on the MiniDV video format as it is a common home video source from the last 20 years and at risk because of the width of its tape and a number of other factors. The following slides will go over some steps that individuals can take to digitize this format. Each situation will be individual, and we're presenting this as a case study, like I said, so you can see the kind of different factors involved. All right, so first, you are going to start off by reviewing some of the necessary equipment involved. You will, of course, need a MiniDV camera or playback deck. If you have the camcorder that you use to make the MiniDV, all the better. You may be able to use this to digitize your tapes. MiniDV cameras are also available on eBay. You may want to consult with the seller or researching online if you are unsure if the type of MiniDV format can be read by the deck or the camera that you choose on eBay works for you. So that's maybe another topic for another time, but just to throw that out there as a possibility. You'll also want a notebook to later enter notes in a spreadsheet about transfer. While the transfer is happening, it's kind of a handy thing to be able to notate where things are happening, that kind of thing. You also need a computer, hopefully relatively contemporary, with cables that are able to connect to your computer from your camera or deck. You'll also need software on your computer, such as iMovie, the example that we'll use today, that will capture a MiniDV tape file, and a hard drive that contains enough storage space to take the DV files resulting from the digitization, and some kind of storage for backing up your files. So the storage that we're going to be using today and that we'll be using in this example is actually within the computer. So the hard drive is a function of the computer, and if you have enough storage, you can do it there. MiniDV requires approximately 1 GB of storage for every 5 minutes. So you can calculate from there how much storage you will need for the hard drive that you will need to store the files on. So keeping notes about your transfer. Part of keeping track of your collection, like we've said and emphasized throughout this talk, is recording and keeping tabs on what it is about. So before, during, and after your transfer, you'll want to keep some notes. It's worth noting that when you are taking notes during transfer, it's not advised to stop or pause due to stress this puts on the tape itself. If you're really interested in this topic, in the topic of metadata and description and information about the files, I encourage you to check out the PB Core project, Public Broadcasting Core project. Most recently, their initiative has come to include more of a diverse set of audiences beyond the kind of digital library application. So there's even more kind of outreach to communities that are focusing on their personal collections or maybe are under-resourced and don't have the bandwidth or resources to have a functioning database. So you can see that kind of like these basic fields and what their purposes might be at pbcore.org. I just wanted to kind of review these fields too. The tape label is something that might be from years ago. So you're going to want to notate down what that tape label says. Numbering system. You're going to want to come up with some sort of numbering system. I would recommend coming up with your own, and don't belabor the topic. Really just number the tapes as consistently as possible. Description during recording, like I said, you're not going to want to pause the recording, but you're going to want to know what is happening during the recording for later. Any people that might be in your recording. So you might want to notate down who in your family was seen in the recording while the connection was happening. Location of the recording. If you can figure out what the location of the recording is, kind of the magic of cataloging for some of us is actually figuring out and discovering who the people and locations are of these recordings. So it can be a really interesting, fascinating process. Software used. So this is one for the kind of digital preservation side of things. So you might want to talk to just notate down what you use to capture and the kind of recording device that you use, so your camera thing. So you can see here Yvonne Ng, who is our trusty content developer for this series, along with a MiniDV camera, alongside a few MiniDV tapes that she has selected that are valuable to her. And this image was courtesy of the Activist Archivist. They created it for Home Movie Day, and we were really grateful for them to be able to use this image. And so we wanted to, first thing is to assess all the equipment that you have. So you'll see that Yvonne has next to her, like I said, the MiniDV camera, tapes that she selected for digitization, and any necessary cables. Your specific computer will allow you to check storage available on the hard drive. In a Mac computer running Yosemite operating system, you can find out how much storage is available by heading to the Apple logo in the top left of your screen, clicking About, and then clicking the Storage tab. Like we mentioned before, you'll need software in order to capture MiniDV to your camera, to your computer from your camera. Your camera should have an output. Here it is FireWire 400, but you might also see a USB output. There are commonly available cables for sale online or in your local electronics or computer store. You might want to make sure that the cables are appropriate to the in and out points. You'll want to make sure that the cables are appropriate to your in and out points in your capture. Into your computer is the FireWire 800 in this case, and FireWire 400 out of the MiniDV camera. The signal will run through this cable and be captured by software such as iMovie or Final Cut Pro, common video editing software. And here you can see the FireWire cable connected on the camera side. This is, like I said, just an example. So we wanted to kind of give you a view of what you'll be seeing. And next is the settings question, which is a big question. So you'll need to configure some settings for your capture. Settings that are particularly important include frame rate, resolution, aspect ratio for SD or HD, depending, in this case it's SD, PAL or NTSC, and your output file format. So in this case, Yvonne is using NTSC, 30 frames per second. That's appropriate to the original MiniDV. And she has chosen to import HD video as large. So this setting has no effect for DV. So this is just another kind of setting that you will look at, and this will be particular again to your own specific context and use case. So you may want to capture at a lower resolution, you may want to capture at a higher resolution. So this is it's a highly subjective action, but it's just something to keep in mind. And like I said, we are trying to apply archival practices in this context, and not every archival practice we understand will be able to be followed, but we want to make sure that media is copied somewhere, and so that it's that very first kind of I am a vol question is getting the media off and onto a file format. All right, and next is import from camera. So very exciting. This is the next step, and you'll be clicking import from camera once the tape is in the camera. Sometimes some software allow you to remotely control the camera, or you may have to press play on your camera in order to initiate capture. And of course, before you put the tape into the camera, you will want to inspect it. So you want to take a look at it, make sure there are no breaks in the tape, and breaks in the housing of the tape. That's kind of common for, especially for MiniDV, because since it's a very small format and can sometimes get lost in boxes, things like that. Sometimes the housing can break, and in that case, you would want to seek advice from a professional and try and see if you they can rehouse it for you. And you'll also want to take a look for any signs of mold, so any flaking, especially white flakes that you might see in the inside of the tape. You'll definitely want to not put that in your camera because it would damage your camera. So you would want to talk to a professional, like I said. So that's kind of the steps for inspection of MiniDV. So for Mac users using iMovie, you'll again want to rewind the tape to the beginning and then begin import from here. So in this case, it's import from camera for this case study. Okay, so now you will wait and will likely be able to view the capture in real time by your capture software. You may run into some technical hiccups, but like we said, it's all going to be worth it in the end. You can see and share your media. If too many technical problems arise, there are plenty of vendors out there who would be happy to work with you to get your media preserved and accessible. Or rather, get your media off of the original carrier and accessible. So I wanted to review a few common errors in troubleshooting. And this, like I said, this is going to be maybe a work in progress for some time. So you want to be persistent. It won't be totally clear until you start in on testing the workflow. We would recommend, like I said, acquiring some non-archival test tapes to use to establish a workflow and train whoever is going to be doing the work. Errors are human and machine-made, and we kind of thought it would be helpful to review some of the common errors and troubleshooting items you may encounter either during or after your transfer. So a corrupt file. There are various manifestations here. This is a big topic, and reasons behind why a file might be corrupted. But basically, it means that there is something wrong with the file that doesn't have to do with the software that you're playing the file back on or anything surrounding the file. It's a problem with the file itself. And that's kind of, a larger problem. You might need to do retransfer of the file. That's another reason why you would say keep an analog videotape or a MiniDV tape after digitization, that kind of thing. So you can't play back a file. This could be used due to the software that you're using or the amount of memory available on your computer or another reason. It's always good to reach out to a friend or a neighbor who is technically savvy or has a contemporary setup to ask to check out your files, or again, reach out to the AMIA community for advice on what software might be best to use. I often recommend VLC Player or M Player, which are both free and open source playback softwares, as these support a large number of file formats. All right. Artifacts resulting from a transfer. We went over this a little bit in the last section, but like I said, you can consult the AV Artifact Atlas or look to your local vendor for advice. And there are, like I said, artifacts that happen in transfer. There are artifacts that happen because of correction, that kind of thing. So it takes some learning and it takes a little bit of practice before you know what artifacts are resulting from what thing that happened in the past or from what action. Audio missing. I have found in the past that this can often be due to a software playback issue rather than anything wrong with the file, so I would recommend trying multiple players if you can. Disk is full. This one is preventable, but it happens to the best of us. If you know what file format and can calculate the rate of transfer based on the tape length, then you can ensure before starting to digitize that you have enough room for capturing your video. Locating a setting. This will likely require some online research or resources such as tech-savvy friends. So this is really individual to each software type. Every software that I've tried to use that actually has capture as a component to what you're doing has a different workflow. So it has a different way of identifying where you put the frames per second, where you set the resolution, where you set the file format that you want to output, that kind of thing. So it is a really individualized question, and you're going to want to really take a look at your individual context and take some time with that. So following digitization, so you've gotten the big part done with. Congratulations. You're going to want to come up with some kind of consistent way of naming files, especially for personal collections. This is important. Come up with a way that is easiest for you, appropriately descriptive, so that you have a couple of places where description of your video might be accessed. So this is one thing where it might be different for archives than personal collections. Depending on the software you use for capture, you might name your file within that program. Document what your file naming scheme is for others that are coming after you. Define what you mean by 1982-09_winter-NYC part 1. So part 1 can mean multiple things, right? So it could be part of 10, part of maybe 5 tapes, that kind of thing. So you're going to want to just identify what the naming scheme is for someone coming after. And I just want to emphasize too that you want to just come up with what works best for you. In this case, for file naming, I wouldn't belabor this too much. It's the same kind of thing with identifiers. You really want to just stick with what you have. You really want to figure out what works best, have a conversation about it, and then kind of go from there. It's that kind of eye on the ball question that we talked about before. All right, so you're coming up on digital preservation and storage. Where will you keep your physical and digital media after it has been digitized? For physical storage, you're going to want to keep it in a cool, dry, and dark place. You're going to want to make sure that it is out of the way of any flooding. Basements can often be variable in terms of humidity, and they're often can be a good place for some folks, but for others in different climates, it can be a very bad place. So you kind of want to keep that in mind. If you have the ability to store in an offsite location, you're going to really want to evaluate that the same way you would in your home. There are records management companies and places that, if you can afford it, have disaster control, they have labeling, they apply unique identifiers themselves, that kind of thing. And if you want, we could follow up with those names of those vendors if that's something that's of interest to you. It is quite expensive though, so just to keep that in mind. For digital storage, you're going to want to always back up, preferably to a separate geographic location. It's often helpful to copy and then send a copy to a friend that you trust who maybe lives in a different place than you. So, far away from, say, if you lived in San Francisco and earthquake was a risk, you maybe want to send it to a friend who is in Oklahoma, say, and they have a different disaster to worry about. So, so that kind of thing might be a factor for you in considering. So you are going to want to replace and periodically check your storage media. That is something that is good to just spin up your hard drive, connect it to your computer every now and then, and check your file format. Check that the drive is still up and powering up. Cloud services such as Dropbox or Google Drive are always an option, but remember to be careful about these services altering the quality of your files, and look carefully at the terms of service. You can look into more technical solutions as your comfort level allows. We would suggest that those of you who are tech savvy do an internet search for fixity checking and Bagit, which is a Library of Congress software initiative. These are relatively simple ways to add an extra measure of protection to your personal collection of digital files. And this is another situation where audience is the focus. So you would want to you would want to take a look at our digital formats and storage webinars for more information on that. So preservation and sustainability, we wanted to kind of go into the considerations for long-term care of your collection, some questions that you might be faced with, some interesting things to consider, that kind of thing. Hardware may fail or require replacement. Excuse me. You may need to eventually copy the files from one hard drive to another, because obviously hardware fails, it's a temporary thing. So digital preservation is always going to be an active process. It's never going to be kind of stick a hard drive on the shelf and leave it alone. You really need to be active and maintaining that resource. Software need to be updated in order to play back your files. Formats, both physical and digital, will become out of date and unsupported. You may need to move your content to a new format. This is particularly, like I said, with video formats for preservation. It's still a much talked about and controversial, I'd say pretty controversial thing in our field still. So we are still working out what is the best for preservation of digital video. And so you want to keep in contact with AMIA. You want to keep in contact with that community and see, if I spin up my hard drive and I see that I still have that MKV file in FFA1, is that a file format that's sustainable? Is that something that I want to keep using for preservation? So we wanted to review some level of what are your one-time costs? What are your ongoing costs? What kind of resources do you need in order to preserve and sustain your collection over, say, a lifetime, like we talked about in the beginning, that kind of thing. So what are your one-time costs? Description and organization of your collection. Digitization. These are kind of one-time costs, hopefully. In the case of corruption of your file, then you may have to go back and digitize again, but we're assuming here that everything went well and you have a bit of a plan for preservation going forward. So you know what it is, you know what the description of the collection is, you know what the digitization is. So that's a resource of time and money that you would be one-time costs. Ongoing costs, to keep a physical space for your materials, keeping analog equipment functioning if you choose, keeping digital formats and storage up to date, transferring content to new digital storage as time goes on. Some potential resources, engage and spark interest in your family, especially younger generations. You may want to consider donating to a local historical society or archive that is interested in your collection. You can provision that personal materials with your social security number or private information be restricted. But if your collection has interest, some historical societies and local museums now are collecting home movie collections because they want to see the kind of local community in real time, the kind of everyday type interest as a part and on the part of archivists and curators of those collections. So you may want to talk to your local historical society or archive if that's the case for them. Then they would be very interested in your collection. You can consider the Internet Archive or another public institution, which I'll talk about a bit later too. And in a will or as part of another end-of-life planning, such as an advance directive, you would want to note down any passwords or another way to get into, say, an account if you chose to put your media on Dropbox or on Google Drive. And even with access purposes, you're going to want to give them, YouTube account information or that kind of thing. So that's another important variable to consider. So finally, we want to talk about accessing your collection and the various options that you have for web streaming. First of all, the question is, do you want to stream your videos online to share with family members who might live remotely or for public purposes? So if you have maybe a collection of video art that you created earlier in your career, you can put this on the web freely. So YouTube is undoubtedly the most common video sharing site. It's important to read the user agreement carefully regarding retaining your rights to your content. The service also compresses your videos. That means that it makes an entirely new video from the video that you upload. It does not allow download of the original file. So once you upload it, it's an entirely new thing. The service also allows for restricting to an individual who holds a private link. So you can send a link to a private video on YouTube to a family member and they'd be able to take a look at it. And I think it requires that you have a Google account to upload to YouTube, so that's another factor to consider. Vimeo is another service. It provides maybe a more high quality access option and you can easily access downloading of these again compressed files. So it's gonna also compress your files. It's gonna maybe do a better job of transcoding the file to an access derivative that looks good, I've found in the past. For a lot of filmmakers use it, a lot of independent filmmakers use it, that service. So that's another case where you can restrict a link via password if you wish to restrict viewing only to those you would like to share a password with. And there's also the Internet Archive. You may upload and download original files. However, they will be openly accessible to the public. So most likely uploading will need to be part of a community or have a historical versus personal value in some way. And there's a little bit of talking that you have to do with Internet Archive in order to make your own personal collection within the Internet Archive. So that's another factor to consider as well. And and that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much for participating. And it looks like we have one question, but Laura, what do you think about opening it up to a discussion right now?
Well, I think what we could do is, if we've got this one question, but I think that I can unmute everybody, and if other people have questions, just you can announce your name and ask your question.
Okay, great. So so Michael Dolan asks, will you suggest compress the file transferred from DV tape? I'm going to unmute my other instance of GoToMeeting.
Everybody, so everybody's aware.
Laura?
Yes.
Can you mute Lauren Sorenson Webb?
Yes, let me do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Will you suggest to compress the file transferred from DV tape? The file size is way too big and the quality seems not being worth that space. Okay, yes, so this is another question that's kind of individual to the particular person's context. Ideally, that file would not want to compress the file because it's supposed to be the kind of original master file that you would then transcode everything else from. So, and for archival practice, authenticity is important, so you want to kind of maintain that authenticity of that DV tape. And compressing the file losslessly, yes, definitely, that would be something that you would want to consider, such as going to a format such as FFV1, and an MKV file is a lossless transfer, so you wouldn't lose any of the information from that tape. Yeah, so that would be my answer to the question. I'd say, keep the file as close to the original as possible for your needs, but really do consider your needs and really do consider what file size is way too big for you and what quality is worth it for you in your individual circumstance. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'm totally available to chat right now for the next half hour. We can also I can also note down any questions that I can't answer right now. So.
你用的实际上你用 transfer 就
transfer 是说，我是说 transfer 到是说它已经存到一叠以后，要不要再做 compression？
哦。
哎，它是不是提早结束？这次才1个小时，没有东西讲。
Was anyone? I'm sorry, I maybe missed something.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to shout out, or any discussion points that you'd like to talk about?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Who's this?
Okay. It's not so much a question, but after my grandparents died, Mom's side, we had to put up a lot of things in storage, and one of the things stood up is a lot of film and tape, from home MiniDVs, and one consideration that's been delaying, transferring it from California to Oregon is where to put, how to transfer their footage, safely, so it doesn't get wrecked, and also try to find where in Oregon could you find storage that fits those criteria of cold, dry, dark.
Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that your collection is with your family right now, and they're in Oregon, and you'd like to.
Well, my parents are in Oregon, and then because my mom grew up in California, everything is now sort of in storage, and I guess kind of because I'm learning how to be like an archivist or something. They kind of,
好吧，
deal with like me help out with storage, and then throughout this whole lecture theme was discover whether to do it yourself or digitization. I think probably vendor, but a question I wonder is, if you're going to the field yourself, where do you get the training to be able to help the digital preservation process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mean, it's highly individual to the format, I'd say. I in my personal career, I've worked at institutions that have had folks there who are video engineers who have been extremely generous in training technicians. And in terms of learning on your own, there, I'd say that there aren't a lot of resources to the public, unfortunately. And, I'd really say just keep in touch with the AMIA community. I would really hope that there would be some kind of learning opportunity and for this kind of thing. There's also graduate programs in moving image archiving and preservation that are obviously, expensive and require a lot of time, but those programs also train folks to archive setting, the one format to another. So so yeah, that's my best answer, and I really wish I had another better answer for that, and I wish there was more of a community towards sharing video engineers' knowledge in transfer, but I think we're still yet on our way that way and as a field. So yeah. So Hannah Palin, sorry. Did you have a follow-up for that? Sorry.
No, I didn't. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you for the question. So Hannah has a question. I'm not sure my microphone is working. Is it possible to use the same hard drive in a Mac and then later in a PC environment? So you mean moving from a hard drive that you transferred to, and then later moving it to a PC environment for playback or another use? Is that yeah, okay. So so that can get a little tricky because of file systems. File systems are really funky types of databases that are used. When you see Finder in a Mac setting, that's a file system. PC, if you see like the folder structure, that kind of thing, that's all file system. And you can see NTFS. There's different types. So there's NTFS. There's exFAT. There's other types of file systems that work between Mac or PC or Linux. And I find that it can be tricky between a Mac and a PC. But there are products that you can use. I'd have to look it up. But if you format a drive to NTFS, then and you copy. So I would recommend, if for a workflow in this setting, is to actually digitize to your internal hard drive on your Mac, and then you would want to copy the files to an external hard drive that would be formatted as NTFS. And NTFS can be read by PCs and Macs both. So that's one avenue to try. I think with the Mac, you have to have a certain type of software installed, and I can look that up, what that software is. It's a specific type of software just to be able to read the NTFS. But I will, Hannah, if you can, I'll get your email address from Laura and email you about that, or if other folks are interested, I can email the group too. Great. So yeah, this is a great discussion. Does anyone else have anything to shout out or topics they'd like to talk about? Oh, before Hannah's, sorry, Michael. Sorry, Mike. What about using MiniDV as a transfer device to capture the analog formats like beta and VHS? So I wouldn't recommend that because MiniDV if you're going through if you're going through a MiniDV setting, if you're going through that FireWire, through the camera, you're changing the signal from that analog signal to MiniDV, is my understanding. And this, this might be something that I might want to follow up on with some engineering experts, but my understanding is that it is easier and more authentic in terms of archival practice to just go from MiniDV to the computer rather than going through a format like beta and VHS. So you're basically like, I guess I get what you mean is that you would be moving from, sorry, I'm just losing here. Okay, so you're moving from the MiniDV and then onto a beta or VHS tape, and then moving from that to a file. Is that what you're talking about, Mike? Okay, so moving from beta or VHS to MiniDV as a format for preservation. So I would, using MiniDV as a codec. So yeah, so I would recommend, and this is, again, one of these questions of, is what your particular circumstance would best be for you, like what is your individual circumstance. But I would recommend as an archival practice to not go through any other formats, to just transfer from analog to digital, as analog, the digital format being 10-bit uncompressed codec. MiniDV is a lossy compression. MiniDV has lossy compression, so anytime you transfer it, it's going to lose quality. Anytime you want to transfer it to another format, it's going to lose information about the file. So MiniDV, even though you want to keep it authentic from, if say you're going from a DV to a DV format as a file, then that would be appropriate, but because since it's authentic. But I'd say going from the analog format to MiniDV would be kind of losing information in that transfer process. So again, individual circumstance, the eye on the ball is that we want to get this off of this fragile carrier, but I'd say that as a best practice, you want to go from analog to the highest quality that you can store, that you can really use on your personal circumstance. Let's see here. So Hannah asked, can you recommend a basic ADVC for folks to use for analog formats? I can't do that right off the top of my head, but I can definitely email you all after I do a little bit of research. I'm a fan of the Blackmagic company. Not to make any endorsements on behalf of AMIA, but I have liked their products in the past, so personally.
Does anybody else have any questions? If not, I'd like to say thank you to Lauren for a great job today, and also on behalf of AMIA's Online Continuing Education Task Force, I want to thank everybody for joining us. We'll be making the recorded audio of the sessions available over the next couple of days, as well as the downloads. And so we'll be sending that out in an email today or tomorrow. And the webinar, if there are people that that missed it, we will have the webinars available on demand starting in mid-October. And I think that's it, unless anybody else has any questions. Lauren, thank you so much.
Oh no, thanks all of you. We appreciate the community effort that this all took. So it's great. And anytime any folks want to contact me, that's my email address, and I'm also on Twitter. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Well, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Bye.